Ka tangi te kātaka, tangi te titi, ka tangi hoki, ko te hei mauri ora, te pare etu nei, tēnā koe, tēnā koe, tēnā koe. Nā mat haere, 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 haere ki te pō. Nā hauora kātou, nā mihi nui a koutou. Nā rangatira, e nā hohoki, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, katoa. No mai haere mai, no mai haere mai ki tēnei kaupapa o te wā. And that kaupapa is a tricky one. We live, obviously, in anxious times. Sometimes it's too much to even open a newspaper, if there's such a thing as opening a newspaper anymore, but going online and seeing the world somehow tipped on its head. And the place of the arts, and the importance of the arts, the power of the arts, the inherent possibilities of them to make a difference in the world and the worlds in which we live, is what we're going to talk about tonight. And we are blessed. Just look across at this group of mana wahine here. My God. What a joy it is for me here at the university, ko Peter O'Connor toko ingoa, ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi, no Tamaki Makaurau. I'm a professor of education here at the University of Auckland, the academic director of the Creative Thinking Project, and on behalf of that group, it's a great pleasure to welcome both you here into this place and to acknowledge my newfound friends from the work that we were doing over the weekend. This group of women share much in common, and you'll hear that from them soon. I'm going to sit down and keep as quiet as I possibly can for an academic over the next hour and leave it for our panellists mainly to talk. But one of the things that they share in common is this quite extraordinary book, Headlands, News Stories of Anxiety. And it's extraordinary because it's a book which I think would have been very difficult for the authors to write, very difficult for me as a reader at times to read, enormously important for what it taught me about a really important issue that faces so many of us in New Zealand, the issue of anxiety and what it means and the way in which stigma and other elements add up to disable people's lives. So it's an extraordinarily powerful book. My colleague and friend David Jacobs at the back is in the process of turning this book with these writers and a series of filmmakers into a film. And so over the weekend the University of Auckland was delighted to be able to host these mana wahine and others to begin the process of making a film which tells the stories of this book. I thought, rather than introducing them individually, an opportunity for them to mihi directly to us, and so I'll pass it right to the end of the table to the most wonderful writer, performer, Henny Moore Baker. Round of applause.
Kia ora tātou. Nau mai haere mai ki te whakanui tēnei kaupapa whakahirahira. Ko Henny Moana Baker tēnei, e mihi atu nei kia koutou, katoa. Ki te mana whenua, tēnā koutou. Kia papa tuanuku, kia rangi nui, ki ngā atua katoa, ngā manaakitanga, ki rungi a tātou katoa. Ko ngā tiraukawa, ko ngā te toa rangatira, ko te ātiawa, ko ngā itahu hoki, ka itahu me ki, ngā iwi, te taha o taku pāpā, ki te taha o taku māma no Tiamani me Ingarangi. So I come from those 4 tribes on my dad's side, and also from England on his side, and then on my mum's side from England as well, or from the UK, and also from this really tiny village in the south of Germany called Oberammergau. Has anyone ever heard of it? Yeah. So they have the Passion Play there once every 10 years or something, yeah. But apparently there's also an Unterammergau. So there's over, Amago and under Amago. It's all very, I'm still learning about these things. I live in Berlin, and I've lived there for 4 years, and it's been extraordinary actually to be here for this weekend, to be part of the Hui.
Bonnie Etherington. Bonnie.
Kia ora. My name is Bonnie, and I am from Whakatū, Nelson region, and there's a few people, like 2 people, 3 people from the Nelson region here. I was raised in West Papua, and I currently live just north of Chicago, where I'm completing my PhD in literature at Northwestern University, and it's very overwhelming for me to be at this table with these writers who I deeply admire and do not feel like I am in the same league as. So I'm really excited to be here.
What ifs? I'm impressed that Peter, you actually look good today. Nice shirt. I'm just saying. And Bonnie, you look extraordinary. Talofa lava. Kia ora koutou. My name is Selina Tusitala-Marsh. We were brought together to talk about the power and possibilities in creativity and the relationship with well-being. And, it took me 15 years to figure out what I was in this institution. And this is my home institution. I both love and hate my university. It has given me immeasurable opportunities, and it has also endeavoured to kind of cookie cutter me. And so that's why it's taken 15 years to figure out that I am a Pacifica poet-scholar. And it's through poetry that I give out my critical and my creative work to the world. So welcome to my space, and it's so wonderful to see your faces tonight. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou. My name's Naomi Arnold. I'm a freelance journalist, an author of this book, which just is coming out in October.
Work it.
I know, subtle.
I just arrived in the post on Friday, and I thought, I must bring this up to Auckland to show people. And editor of Headlands, which came out last October, and has been a really extraordinary experience. I'm from Nelson also, but grew up in Te Puke, in the Bay of Plenty, if anyone's familiar with Bay of Plenty, yep. So these wonderful women and several other wonderful people scattered in the audience all have essays in here. There's 32 writers, 31 stories, looking inside and outside their heads at this issue of anxiety. And David's film project, which is actually a series of short films, has been a really wonderful way to springboard off the stories that are captured in here in a static form, and they now appear to be sprouting new shoots and having a new life in different forms, which has been incredibly rewarding for me to sit back and see that starting to happen. So, yeah.
So the format of the evening's a simple and rather traditional one. I have a series of questions, and then at some point we'll ask some of our writers to give a reading for us, some kind of opportunity to drop into their creative work, and an opportunity, because it is a conversation, to widen that out for questions or comments from people who've tuned out. It says something about the world we live in, that we've sold out, even though it was free, an event about creativity and health and well-being. It says something about a time that's right for this kind of conversation. It would have been very difficult to have had this conversation even 5 years ago. And it says something about where we've come, both in terms of our understandings of the arts and the creative process, and also our understandings of health and mental health. I often work with very little ones, and I ask them before we begin work, because I'm a theatre maker with small children, to warm up their imaginations. And the way in which I do that is to ask them to put their hands out in front of them. So this is quite a cool and cold room, so I'm just going to ask you to warm up your imagination. My friend Chrissy loves doing this all the time. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just warm up your hands, and I'm going to ask you to put your hands where you keep your imagination. Where do you keep your imagination? Are you ready? Are they warm? 3, when I get to 0, that's where you're going to have to put your hands. 3, 2, 1, 0. Oh, how beautiful. Some on their heads, some on their... Oh, look at this. Is fascinating. Where did our writers put their imagination? So my first question to anyone on the panel, where does your imagination, where does your creativity come from? Where does it sit in you? Bonnie, you look like you've got an answer there.
In my stomach. I haven't quite figured out why I do that. But I think I very much go with my gut in most things, and my stomach leads me.
So for you, creativity is this kind of instinctual process rather than necessarily a rational head process. It was interesting to watch how many put hands on their heads.
I think that all depends on context, right?
Yeah.
Because I pride myself on being an occasional poet as well. So someone gets married, they need a poem, I'm there. Someone dies, they need a poem, I'm there, right? And so making poetry an everyday part of life and seeing the need is really important for me. So the Hawaiians actually have the nga'ao, which is heart, gut, all together, right? And so for me, creativity comes when I move to, because there's a need or a demand or an occasion or an event. And other times just because I'm moved because of what's happening around me.
And the movement somewhere here.
Very much so.
Any more ones?
I'm tempted to say my liver, because in Māori you say te tau taku ate, you say, or you also say te tau taku manua, you're the darling of my heart, but also people say te tau taku ate, meaning you're the darling of my liver. So the ate is the liver, but it also, and you know, please don't be under the impression that I know all about these things, because I'm still a beginner in learning these esoteric, philosophical aspects of my culture and my dad's culture. But I've written about that before, and it feels like it makes a lot of sense to me, the liver. I also like how it kind of makes me hear the word lover when I say that, especially in a New Zealand accent.
And Lindauer. Traditional Association, writers, drinking, wine.
You can spot the poets on the panel. Coleridge had this idea around the liver as well, in terms of the humours, didn't he? And this notion of the competing humours and how that related to creativity. There's privileging, though, often now in terms of creativity sits in this part of who we are as human beings and that alone. Naomi, what about for you?
Well, I just, when we were doing the hands rubbing, I was thinking, where do I feel it, the muse, whatever, and it does come from my heart, because as a journalist, my job is to listen to people and interpret their stories as safely for them as possible, as it's possible to do, and creativity for me always comes from being moved by something or a feeling of empathy. So you know, when you're sitting across from someone who's gone through something, which is how people often end up coming to the attention of the media, you have to have a real heart for them and how they're feeling to keep them safe in what can be a very scary thing for them. And a place of emotion is what drives my creativity or my writing.
And this book is full of liver and
Spleen
and gut and bile, isn't it?
Yeah.
And actually, if I've read all your work, and it has a feeling, and I read that it's a fully embodied process for all of you as writers. Is that part of it as well?
Me?
for anyone who
Yeah.
wants to pick up on that.
There is a lot in here about the body and how anxiety manifests in the body, from the shakes to sickness to sleeplessness, breathing problems, nausea. Everyone, most people in here have some sort of physical sensation, sweat, that their mental state comes through physically. So
Yeah.
One of the things that we did when we was this idea that if you rub your hands and put it somewhere, it'd be wonderful, isn't it, that you could warm up your creativity so simply. How do you, and you kind of alluded to working in an institution like that cookie cutters, but for all of us, there's a squeeze on our creativity, isn't there? And almost from the moment we start walking and talking, there's a squeeze on it. So how do you keep that imagination, that creativity warm, alive in your bodies?
I don't go anywhere, or seldom go anywhere without this, without, you know, a notebook and a pen. And it's no coincidence that it is blood red, heart red, because I have to write in order to know what I think. And so I practice Julia Cameron's The Morning Pages, just 3 pages of longhand writing most mornings. And the first, you know, page 1 is the internal censor going, here we go again. Who do you think you are? Can you not just be the same? And is your voice worthy? Who cares about what you think, or even how you want to kind of shape what you think and throw it into the world? And then page 2, this kind of gentler, softer, kinder voice comes to the surface, and a wisdom comes, and it's like, yeah, what do you have to say? It's a holding space. And what was interesting when I discussed my creative non-fiction piece with my filmmaker is that she identified all these kind of cave-like, womb-like holding spaces under the head, you know, under the covers in bed, in an actual cave. And she was able to draw those themes of it is in that enclosed, safe space that I can kind of gird my loins and then go out there to share. So that isolated space, but just kind of primarily to shut out the hubbub around me, to figure out what do I want to say and how do I want to say it? What does my voice sound like? And these are the safe space pages.
Safe pages for the what and how. Sounds fascinating. Is that a similar process for people or different?
Yes, I also tend to go around with a notebook, but the last thing you said about quieting the hubbub really rings true for me. When I was working with my filmmaker this weekend, I just see someone I know. Hi, Michael. Nice to see you. Sorry.
And then she waved to Michael, disrupting all the proceedings.
Well, you haven't seen someone for several years. It's not. She noticed that my story is not a quiet story. It's a lot of it's about sound, and I always think of myself as more about visuals. But she noticed all these sounds in it. And for me, being able to warm up the creativity is about being able to muffle those sounds in my head so I can get there. And that doesn't always work for me. But sometimes I go for a walk. That sounds really simple. But I also spend a lot of time doing other things with my hands, such as crocheting, embroidering, hand stitching. And sometimes those are the only ways I can quiet that noise and then come to the page. Sometimes it takes me a very long time.
There's lots of people nodding who I'm imagining are saying that's how they live with anxiety, or that's how they live as artists, or they live as both. This need to quieten down the world to begin that creative process, and multiple ways of doing that: walking, crocheting, a whole range of different possibilities. And we understand that from the neuroscience, that we are actually moving into a different space so that we have that opportunity to do that.
Medication. It's not the only thing I do, but because I wouldn't be here if it was the only thing I do. So I do a lot of going to the gym. I do a lot of making sure I get the right amount of sleep and talking to friends every day, and surrounding myself with people who are sympathetic to wellness issues. But yeah, medication has been a big part of that for me, as one of the tools in my tool belt. Not so much to quiet things down, but to provide me with focus. Yeah, so that I can. I guess it is quieting things down, just like a benign pair of blinkers. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just thinking, what you've all said is a daily practice. Everything, it doesn't get any easier. You do morning pages every day to get through the shit, to get to the place where you're feeling better. It just never gets easier, does it? Over 30, 20, 30, 40 years. Right? It really doesn't.
Money back.
Yeah. Whose idea was this?
It sounds like this idea of being creative. Being creative is quite hard work. It's not something that just drops out of the sky and a poem arrives. That part of the creative process is a process of, for some of you, a daily ritual, a daily way of being in the world, of kind of mastering both what you want to say and how you want to say it. So,
but it's a bit like meditation. They say it's not easy, but it's simple. Not easy, but it's simple. It's like flossing your teeth, as I say to my sons, right? Not easy, but simple. And the long-term investment, like it pays off long-term, And the writing for me extended, like I've always been a doodler, and that has, like, the drawn line has been an amazing kind of release for me. So if you get out anything in New Zealand literature at our library and you see little doodlings in the marginalia, that's probably me, sorry. But it helps me think, and it helps me relax, and it helps me breathe.
Thinking and breathing somehow connected in the process of making as well.
Well, I'm trying not to fold my legs like Rosemary taught us in the retreat. She said, like, feet square on the ground, knees slightly apart, to enable the diaphragm to breathe properly, but that's hard to do too.
So probably, people in here are working in different creative ways. Would it be reasonable to say that part of becoming more creative is working at it? Is that a reasonable kind of...
Yeah, when these three were talking before, all I was thinking of was just the brute force method, is just sitting down and just... Well, who said I sit down and open a vein and bleed all over the page? Who said that?
Someone said that.
Yeah, writing's easy. You just sit down and open a vein or something like that. But that's how I feel like it, because I work with sometimes daily deadlines, sometimes multiple deadlines per day, and it's just a kind of a nightmare. It's just brute force, force yourself to. And once you've gone for 5, 10, 15 minutes, turn your phone off, put it in a drawer, unplugged everything. It's habit starts to happen, but there's certainly no muse that arrives when you're feeling, you need to make
the
a living.
muse doesn't arrive in the middle of the night.
No.
Sometimes it does, though, because Tusiata Dreams wakes up and writes all her poems down, and voila, we've got the bones of something, and that's not fair.
Yeah. Well, she turns up, but she's just not very reliable.
Yes.
The muse isn't very reliable.
An unfaithful lover, yes.
How true is that for those of us who are writers and thinkers and makers? So it seems that there's work involved, but it's playful work, isn't it? And the notion that when we're engaged in the creative process, we're quite happy to make lots of mistakes as we go, that we don't arrive at the perfect polished in one hit. So how much of that discipline mastery, that playful kind of thing is going on when you're writing?
A lot. The thing that does it for me, the thing that opens it up enough to allow a poem or whatever to exist is actually making the time for it, and also having a deadline. And I also have a writing group that I've been meeting with, infrequently and frequently for 16 years. So we aim to meet weekly. We don't always meet weekly, but they're there and they've been there, kind of through thick and thin. And I've had years at a time when I haven't been able to write, and they constantly invite me to the meetings, and whether I turn up or not, they're going to invite me the next week, and that's massive. That's the kind of on the ground support that really keeps me going.
And the playfulness as well.
Playfulness. Oh yeah, that. Yeah. Yeah, it's really the playfulness of it for me is so brief, but so sweet that it keeps me going through all of those years. It's part of why I enjoy being a performer as well as a page writer, because when you perform your stuff, you get to kind of publish it in a different arena, and you get immediate feedback and hopefully immediate, laughs. And that, I read one of my stories at a school the other day. My dad's partner, Anthea, took me to Otakiri School, shout out to Otakiri School, and they were 5 up to around 11 or 12, and they said to me, what's the most fun thing about being a writer? And I said, right now, because it was absolutely delightful to share it that way.
Yeah, well, we'll ask you in a minute to share something, to see if people will laugh. If it's one of those pieces in here, see if you can find something funny in there. Yeah. Bonnie, what about your playful way of working with this work?
I wish I was a playful writer. Perhaps the playfulness for me comes through for me, research is very generative for the projects, the creative projects and the academic projects that I work on. I feel like I'm exploring the same questions that I'm endlessly curious about through both, and that's what brings them together. And so when you first hear something that really excites you, a weird fact, or I was recently in Iceland and I was in the Maritime Museum, and there's all this stuff about the fishery industry, and for some reason that was just endlessly fascinating to me. And that first foray into that kind of research where you don't know where it's going, but you're interested, so you keep pursuing it anyway. That for me is where the playfulness comes through.
Yeah, that endless curiosity seems to sit at the heart of the whole creative process. Just being fascinated with the world itself and what an answer might be to a question you haven't arrived at. Selena, you're very playful in your writing.
Yeah, I want to pick up on the mistakes idea, because, taking my lead from Naomi, she was a mistake. That's Mophead. So this is my graphic mini memoir. How did you get that?
I'm a reviewer.
Oh, yeah. This is the only advanced copy in the country. So like Naomi, the baby was born on Friday, and so she started off as a doodle. And when Anne O'Brien asked me if I could draw live, thinking about the festival next year, I was like, yeah, of course I can. And then kind of thought, can I? And actually, because she'll start off as a scribble on the board for the kids, and I'll go, oh, mistake, do another scribble, oh, mistake, and then I'll create her here. And then the story of Mophead, which was the name I was teased by in primary school, and that stuck for 20 years. I don't know why, and it's the story of being teased as a mophead, and then 30 years later becoming the New Zealand Poet Laureate in possession of a toko, which looks like this long, luxurious mop, right, and still gets called a mop by ignorant Pākehā men, actually. Sorry, but so it's in the book. But so my process was a bit kind of in the opposite of Hini Moana's, because it started out as play. I went to see Sam Elworthy, my publisher at AUP, to talk about a written memoir, 50,000 words of it. We had the meeting, very excited, and then I was about to walk out the door and I said, "Oh, what do you think of this?" And I pulled her out, and I pulled out a whole storyboard, and he was like, "Sit back down, we need to talk about this." And then a year and a half later, because it was play, and then I had to refine and talk to, work with a designer and get the words right. And so play, then really, really hard work. And like I can hand on my heart say that this was equal, if not more than, an 8,000 word critical article. The work involved.
I'm
in
sure the
this.
university sees it like that.
Yes, we're hoping.
I'm serious too. It should, because it is a creative product which comes from the experience of working here. So I would.
Well, and importantly for me, as a researcher, one of perhaps 12 in the world that specialises in Māori and Pacific literature and criticism, the only way that I'm going to get the story out about Pacific Island women poets, which is based on my PhD, is this. It's by impacting the curriculum and sowing the seeds of possibility and power and voice in the primary schools. We can't wait till they're prospective enrollees at university at year 12 and 13, right? So you'll have to help me with my strategic language and my APR.
I wondered, but certainly in terms of the way the university sees outputs, that these kinds of things are really important creative outcomes for us. I was wondering, before we get to Naomi, if we could hear a little of it.
Yes.
What do you think? That'd be all right.
That would be wonderful. The beginning. Yes, the beginning. Okay. Mop head. How your difference makes a difference, and it's dedicated for all those who stick out. And I was in Wanganui, a Wanganui Literary Festival, when I was talking through the idea, because that's what I do, I like to get the feedback, and read the skeleton of this story. It's a very specific Pacific story, and an elderly, balding man, Pākehā man, with red curls at the base of his neck and a red moustache and beard, stood up and said, "That's my story." And so it just ticked the box, it ticked the box. So how your difference makes a difference. When I was 10, I was teased for having big hair. Not just curly hair, but wild awhakasi hair. Awhakasi equals being Samoan plus something else. I got thick, wavy hair from my Samoan Tuvaluan mum, and thin, curly hair from my New Zealand, Scottish, English, French dad. And you'll have to buy the book too.
Naomi.
I just love how you're talking about your character as her. She's you, but she's external to you. Like that's just that's lovely. Playfulness.
Playful,
in writing.
yeah. As a journalist.
Yeah. Well, if you're too playful, you just get cut. It just gets edited out. So there is it can be just like mine I mentioned before, the most sublime moment when you write a good sentence. Out of thousands of sentences, and you just think, that was a good sentence. Just quietly, just happy, you can't get too big or it'll get cut. But the playfulness can come with, we can't be too cute with language, but just happening upon a really satisfying image or a way of explaining something, and that can bring a lot of joy, very intimately.
We've all talked, so you've all talked about the importance of joy in the creative process. We talked about an anxious world. And so that question of the importance of being involved in something which gives you joy as a maker, and there was joy even in my reading of this as I kind of connected with each author, and I'm fascinated by the possibilities of joy in a world where sometimes it doesn't feel like there's a great deal. And again, just invite you into that conversation.
For me, I'm all about the tension between the dark and the light, and in any piece of writing or any creativity. I'm fascinated by tension and release, I guess, in art overall. And so when I very much like recontextualizing a piece of language and putting it somewhere where it didn't originally belong or where it wasn't born, and seeing what that does to the language. So another way that I use this playfulness, I guess, is by doing this collage approach. So I'll make lots of language around the place in various really not very tidy journals. Like they've got bits ripped off them, and I don't know what time of year I wrote them or even what decade, but I'll just kind of have them around, drag them up, take a piece of text from there and there and put them together. And I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the poem is until it tells me what it is. So I don't often work from that thing of, I'd like to write a poem about joy or something. It tells me what it wants to be about. Sometimes I do. I've written some poems. I wrote a poem about ihu mātau and a poem about taputeranga marae recently. But most of the time, that's not how I work. So. Yeah, the tension between the joy, the darkness and the light really does it for me.
Yeah, Aristotle talked about it a long time ago, is that's the central kind of tension that all artists play with.
I was talking to him about that.
Well, yeah. I was just doing on the professor thing there, you just set it up there. Why don't we throw it out for anybody who might have a thought or a question, because we're kind of about halfway through our talk, or just a little bit over. So is there anyone there? Look at that. There's a question or a thought that you'd like to ask. That's a great question.
I've been thinking a lot about this question of whether even something like meditation or mindfulness is actually just privatizing a public problem, because I was talking with a friend Gay in the Wairarapa, and we were talking about how it's actually quite a reasonable thing to be very anxious, in the world as it is today. And in terms of the integration of art into our lives or not, the ease with which we can do that or not, it feels to me inseparable from my creativity, if you like, feels inseparable from myself, and therefore inseparable from my health overall. And I think about, when you first go to a marae and they say to you, this is our, actually Bruce used to say this at Taputeranga. He used to say, this marae is our church, it's our university, it's our art gallery, it's our kindergarten, it's our cemetery, it's all of those things all in one at different times. So it's a dynamic space, and it's a dynamic process, more like a verb than a noun, I guess. And so that's what I aim for. When people say, where do you get your ideas from, or where does your creativity come from? Well, it comes from if I'm feeling well and good, and I can function enough to eat breakfast and have a shower and stuff. That's a really good start. It's just inseparable for me from even, how much I spend on the cost of living. The basics of life are inseparable from these other basics of life. It doesn't seem to me like it's something, the Western models would like it to be different, and that's where universities, amazing, love them, libraries love them, but it's so separated, everything's so separated, and so the challenge is to use these things, many things, to sew things back together again. Yeah.
The arts is a verb.
Yes. Sorry, didn't I?
No.
You were. That's why it was important, I think, when I had the meeting with Sam, and he said, that's a fantastic idea. We can get a professional illustrator in to illustrate your story. And I was like, yeah, nah. And I said, because part of the message of the book is you can do it. Like, you don't have to live your life by these confined boundaries. And I call myself a doodler and not an artist, and that's kind of because I want it to be accessible, so that, you know, when I go into schools, it's like, oh, that's Selena, she's the poet, she's the lecturer, she draws her own pictures and writes her own stories. I do too, you know. And the other thing about the stories is, and why this book has been so important, is because of, I'm just going to read a couple of pages. My hair was so wild it defied gravity and didn't come back down to earth. So big it wouldn't fit under hats or caps. It broke the cute bows and clips that the other girls wore. Kids called me Mophead. I was tall, skinny and brown like the mop in our garage. It smelled like old socks. The mop had a head made from hundreds of cotton threads and a long body made of wood. Being called Mophead made me feel bad. I tried to ignore the teasing, but it just got louder. I cut it. Some kids called me Fuzzy Wuzzy, Gollywog. I wore it in plaits like Pippi Longstocking. Some kids called me Pippi Blackstocking. And I had this conversation with Sam, and he was like, do we really want to go there, you know, for a children's audience? Reviewer is nodding her head furiously, so I think we made the right choice, right? That's right. And I said, well, it happened to me when I was 7, 8. Why would I not use art to reflect that? And it's been incredibly therapeutic for me and a whole lot of other kids, and hopefully more, you know, not just with big moppy hair, but with freckles and kids who are too small and too tall. And
there's something about the process and the process of making and the product of the making which is therapeutic. This book kind of helped me make sense, not of my own life, but of the life of, some of my own, but the life of many people I know in a different way. Allowed me to see things in a way that I wouldn't have seen except for the way in which it was put together. Number one, have you got something for us that we might have a listen to?
Sure. This is a poem called Aunties, and it's fashioned after a poem by Joy Harjo called She Had Some Horses. Joy Harjo is the poet laureate, US poet laureate.
The first.
I know, the first Native American poet laureate. Anyway, aunties. We had a marching auntie and an eyelash curler auntie, a headscarves one, a lavender talcum powder auntie and a satin running shorts one. We had an auntie who was laid out on that sheepskin rug by that uncle when she was 6 and 7 and 8. These might be the same aunties. We had an auntie who died on the same day as her own sister and turned into that white horse on the green hill, a drawn-on eyebrows auntie who said, I don't care how good they are at yodeling, they're giving country music a bad name, those girls. We had an auntie who lifted her still working arm above her head to make it easier for us to take off her top for the wheel-in shower. Then that auntie who hickied her great-grandbaby on her hip, and we looked up at her framed against a bright blue Nelson Bay's sky. We had an auntie who said, "You're sick, and you make me sick with your disgusting carry-on, both of you girls." The auntie who said, "How dare you, can't you see your mother is upset?" The auntie who said, "You make me sick with your embarrassing carry-on." Then the one with the sea green eyes and the pounamu black moko kauai, who wanted to teach us karanga. The auntie who gave her permission. We had an auntie married to that uncle who cursed us, who told us you should never be allowed around children, and we never, ever were. The tākaka auntie, Reason left that auntie, and she followed us to the toilet with a mango in her hand and kept talking. She frowned when she smiled, that auntie. She was always, my grandchildren this, my grandchildren that. We had an auntie who said, "Don't worry about me, I'll just close my eyes and wake up in paradise." One of the aunties was actually a nun. One had hands swollen with arthritis, and she always stayed young, very young, too young. I'll leave it there.
Beautiful.
Any other questions or thoughts?
That's a good question. For me, creativity is anything that's making something new from all the scraps and flotsam and bad bits and good bits that we have floating around in our lives, and seeing what we can do with it, and not saying whether it's good or bad, but it's something that you put together to get through the day. If that's what it is for me, it'll be something different for someone else.
It's a really good
Great answer.
Yeah.
I love it. I'm writing it down.
I can't remember it again.
Well, as Bonnie was talking, I was just thinking compost. You know, it's a compost.
In a good way.
Compost is amazing. Like,
Yeah.
compost is a thing of beauty and wonder, and it's just all your experiences thrown in, and stuff just grows out of it. Just exactly, and there's always I won't even start going to compost. But that's how I think of it. Yeah. It's
So creativity
fertile.
is a compost.
Go on. Yeah.
That's as far as I got.
I will start because I did not know anything about astronomy when I started writing a book about astronomy, which was commissioned of me because I do some science journalism, and I literally started at zero and then had to write 60,000 words on the story of New Zealand astronomy, which was a terrifying, difficult, bloodletting process. Then again, it's just pushing through every day, struggling, battling yourself, battling your own anxieties, fears, and just sitting down and just trying again the next day.
Yeah.
The
How about
creative
you guys?
process is scary, it's terrifying, it kind of pushes you into other places that you didn't know you'd get, so maybe that's another kind of addition to your desire to define that. Anyone else?
Well, it really helps to have someone else in the room who believes, who can see what you can't yet see. That's my definition of a mentor. So that idea came as I had one foot out of the meeting proper, right? It was just like, oh, what about this? And if Sam hadn't said, sit back down, then I wouldn't have, I didn't even know it was a risk. I was just kind of like, what do you think? You know, Bonnie?
Yeah, for me, I think writing is always a risk. You're always putting part of yourself out there. You're always risking not doing the story justice. You're risking the responsibilities you have to the communities you come from, and not speaking to them well. So I think when I'm writing, I always do it wrong somehow. I always... it's always never exactly how you envision it, right? I think that's probably true for most creatives, except for the rare ones. I'm just going to say, looking at certain people.
I think you are a real one, and because you, like,
I
The
do-
earth
I do,
cries
I do
out,
have a book. And this was a risk.
Maybe.
And this book was a risk. This was a very scary book for me to write. But I wrote it, for me, it was part of my responsibility to the community in West Papua that helped raise me. And it felt like the book I had to write at the time.
Before we move to Moana, maybe it makes sense for you to read a little of that for us.
I'll just read a very short bit. And so this book comes from, first of all, who knows about where West Papua is? Yeah. So, you know the island New Guinea, half of it is an independent country called Papua New Guinea, and the other half is West Papua, who was colonized by the Dutch and is now colonized by Indonesia. It was known under different names, such as Irian Jaya. Some of you who are older might know it as that name. So I wrote this book out of frustration because when I left West Papua to come here for my undergraduate studies, well, Palmerston North, which is not quite as exciting as Auckland, but it was a good place to write.
Or Chicago.
True. I was frustrated because I felt isolated and wanted to reconnect back to where I considered my home. So I wrote this for West Papua. So, when we flew on the plane towards Irian Jaya that first time, I looked at its body on those maps you get in the in-flight magazines so I could trace how far we had come and how far there was still to go. The island of New Guinea has a bird's body, the body of the most important bird on the island, the bird of paradise. The head and chest belong to Irian Jaya, which was then, and still is today, part of Indonesia, but reincarnated under another name. The rest of the torso and tail belong to Papua New Guinea, which is a different country, even though nothing but a thin black line separates it from its other half. Later, I read in my guidebook how Malay traders visiting the edges of New Guinea called the bird of paradise burung mati, the dead bird, because it was so beautiful, all they ever saw of it was the feathers or the skins prepared to be sold all in a row or mounted on someone's headdress. But I did not see a dead bird when I looked at that bird's body on the long flight. It looked like it was ready to grow wings and fly away, right out of my magazine pages. It did not look like it was supposed to be stuck there above Australia with no way to escape. It looked alive. It looked like it could shake itself free and tear its feathers from the blue grasping sea. It looked wide-mouthed and angry. Sorry, it's not quite as playful.
It is. Oh, were you going to follow up anymore?
About,
I can't
yes.
remember now. I'm like,
Risk, yes. Good question. This was the riskiest thing I've ever written, because I just thought, what's the thing that I'm most ashamed of? That's the thing I'm going to write about, and I'm going to start my piece with it. So it's a really difficult process because all I could do is think, okay, so I'll write it. Doesn't mean anyone's ever going to read it, you know. I had to play all these games in my head to deal with the amount of vulnerability I felt by having it published. And the way that I finally managed to write it is that this amazing woman here, after I had procrastinated for about, for many, many times and asked for I don't know how many extensions, she said, why don't we could just maybe, perhaps I could just do a little interview with you, you know, and I was like, what do you mean interview? What do you mean? And she said, just send a few questions over Facebook Messenger or something like that. And I'm like, okay. So she did. She sent me some questions. I answered them, and that text was 3,000 words or something. And that gave me what I needed to write the essay. And she's done that for other people in this book as well. So this is a really enabling thing rather than a disabling thing. And she doesn't even think it's that big a deal, but it was a massive deal for me to be able to, with all of the risk I felt and all of the vulnerability and exposure of it, to have that level of consideration and care was really vital.
And creativity as an editor,
Yeah.
because we were so moved by how you sourced your writers and the
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah, it was.
I was just
Because
going to
of the
ask you,
topic.
what's the most creative way that you got a story
Facebook
out of
Messenger.
it?
Probably Facebook Messenger. That was unusual. Unusual in the literary sense. But, yeah, I was just going to say, because of the topic, I mean, it was funny because the people I asked first had the hardest time, and the people where I said, you've got, 10 days, they just kind of whipped it out. But because the anxiety built up so much, it just became an impossible hurdle. So, yeah.
Didn't you transcribe someone's story?
I rang
Zion.
Zion. Yeah. So Zion Talmiti is a beautiful man who is a still works as a suicide. Yes, he works in suicide prevention in Christchurch, and I really wanted to include his story in there because he just had some. I've seen him in the media. He had some amazing stories of the people he worked with, and he was like, "Oh, I don't really want to write something," and I said, "Well, I still kind of want your perspective and the incredible stuff you've seen and witnessed." And so I called him, and he ranted. Yeah, I said, just talk to me. So he, again, just transcribed it all and sent it to him, and we just moved it around from there, and it became his piece. And I really love that form of storytelling because it's just so immediate. Like, it was just his words straight out on the page, just arranged, lightly edited for clarity and structure. And yeah, he was happy with that, I think.
It's a gripping story.
Yeah, and it is.
Absolutely
It's very
gripping.
immediate. Yeah. But it would be a shame to have the writing, not being able to write, get in the way of producing the work.
Producing a book, yeah.
So that whole editing process of bringing together all those different creative kind of pieces into one piece seemed to me, as I listened over the weekend, to be a very tricky process. And then on the weekend we were working where writers were sitting alongside filmmakers and then talking about how they would create something else. And it was a fascinating thing for me to be to the side of and to watch that happen over the weekend, and this kind of notion we have that the creative process is a solitary one, and it's not in many ways and in many cases. But this business of working across forms and working with your own stories, deeply personal stories, and shifting them into film. There's a question in there somewhere. It's like Catherine Ryan there, wasn't it? A question that sort of didn't ever quite arrive, but it was in there, wasn't it? Sorry. Is there an answer there to a non-question?
She says, "Can you speak to?"
Oh, can you speak to? Yes. That's what she does, doesn't she? She's lovely with it. Is there something about working across the forms? And then I can see 2-3 more questions in.
It's totally up my alley. I'm so happy when someone comes along to collaborate with, because I can go, yeah, awesome, you do it, awesome. I just have that thing of someone like actually Robbie Duncan, who produced my first album or helped me produce it. He said to me, when you're dealing with people who you collaborate with, choose the right person and then give them a big paddock. And I've really followed that. I've really followed that advice, and I just find it really thrilling to let go of control. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, the joy is coming through working. Joy and creativity is through working with other people. That's where it most comes through for me. I've been lucky enough to collaborate with several different people on in academic contexts, and working with Ellen Jones-Poole, the filmmaker I'm working with, has just been a really joyous experience, and just seeing what she sees in my work, that I'm like, oh yeah, I did write that. Oh yeah, I totally did that. I am a genius. It's just like, and she's like, you do all this? I'm like, yes. Yeah, all of it on purpose. So that's been a lot of joy in there for me.
And I'm working with Chantal Burgoyne, who's a wonderful Samoan filmmaker. And what struck me was the moments that she chose out of my story, and they were really subtle, and so she kept talking about the refracted light that was coming through the hedge. I used to dig out a little cave under the hedge and cast spells in order to gain some sense of control of my chaotic world, and she just kept thinking about that light, and so it repivoted me in relationship to my own work, and that was quite invigorating, and I was just fascinated to see how she received the story, and I'm just going to be so excited to see what she does.
And how do you feel about it, as from across the whole book, Naomi, that these bits will be shifted into?
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, there's an amazing graciousness on the part of the 19 writers who are part of the project to let their story go a little, and allow someone in to take incredibly personal parts of themselves and riff on them. So there are 32 people in the book, and then 19 are happy to work with someone that way, which is amazing, really.
It's very honouring. I just find it really honouring, that someone's that someone's reading it full stop. I always feel this, like, someone's reading it? Oh my God, you're selling those books? It's terrible, but it's so, I find it really honouring.
You like that?
The graciousness, grace might be a part of the whole business of the creative process as well.
And also David's, and someone mentioned ambition over the weekend, just his sheer force of will in getting us all together and getting it all done has been pretty remarkable. Yeah.
Who's sitting very quietly at the back, who's sort of helped us, David Jacobs, who's been doing that work. There was a question, I was going to go there and then behind you to Sue.
I think it's listening and respecting what people have to say. So often we hear from people and we dismiss their words or their stories because of some prejudice or ingrained belief, and you just have to have an open mind as to the story someone's telling you about their life and accept that that's their truth and that happened to them. Thinking of the Me Too movement, obviously, but you have to just listen for a start. We're still there. I'm still at the start. Yeah. What do you guys think? Nod.
The redefinition of what we might call mental illness or whatever as a set of strengths that other people just need to adapt to, please, and then we will we'll bring it. I really love that, and I'm constantly having to relearn that for myself, not to pathologise myself. I think about it culturally too, and again, I'm not an expert on these matters, but the difference between Māori ideas of matakite and seeing, and having access to different portals and realities. Also, just things like I don't know. I can't really speak to that in particular because it's not my story. But I myself have recently, been remedicated and re-diagnosed and relabeled, whatever, and it meant that I went down a path of listening to a whole lot of podcasts and reading a whole lot of resources and books, which were exactly around this thing of like, let's, instead of framing this as something that's a disability or an illness, see this as a set of really extraordinary skills that these people have. How do we bring those skills out in that person? So they're not good at doing their taxes, whatever. Is that really an issue? Let's outsource some of that, So I just mihi to that, really,
It was an extraordinary group in the 1990s. My PhD was around countering stigma associated with mental illness through the arts. There's an extraordinary group in the UK called Peers, people experiencing extraordinary realities. And it's that notion that we're all peers, but we have different ways of experiencing and relating to the world, and we have ways of privileging some of those, but actually they're all extraordinary. We all experience our realities in different ways. We're kind of getting close to an end, and there might be just one or two questions soon.
Well, the thing that I love about being a poet who goes into schools is that it's all exercise based. You know, it's never just one way. It's never me kind of lecturing them on how to be creative. It's all work based driven. So we get to make stuff. And I talk about the etymology of the word poesis, which means to make. So everyone leaves the session coming out with something. And that's not just in schools, but also in workshops. And it's priceless to see the look on someone's face who walks into a workshop like this and then comes out like holding something, having just delivered a poem that they have safely and playfully made. That for me, kind of, and in connection with your question, it's for me, it's all about telling the stories and letting people see their own stories told out there and getting them to add in and weave in and make this huge, unending mat to infinity, you know, where everyone's stories is woven in. And these stories of kind of bullying are quite commonplace, you know, but also the impact that it continues to have on your life. And you can, if you stay silent, it becomes that unsounded space. But there are ways to turn it into your superpower, obviously, you know, so that's part of the message of kind of, you know, that I evangelistically take into the schools.
There's certainly a concern in one part of the work that we're doing in the Creative Thinking Project around the place of creativity in the arts in schools. You know, one of the great tragedies is, I think, in our education system is that there is less arts, less play, especially at that junior level, than there ever has been. And I think there are consequences for that, which are around the health of us as individuals, but also the health of us as a nation. And if we separate our arts from children as if it's some fringe activity, sorry to go back to the hair, but you know, some fringe activity.
That was a curly one.
But you know, if the arts aren't seen as central to who we are as human beings, and therefore central to what we do in schools, is it any surprise we end up in the mess we end up in? I'm going to go right to the back for maybe our last question or comment of the night. I think you're absolutely right, and the distinction that I would make is that when there's a disconnect between what happens in their communities and their lives and what happens in schools, so that those rich arts aren't valued within what they do for 8 hours a day and they don't come in, and that there's a privileging of other ways of knowing and other ways of being, we actually end up in all sorts of problems. So actually, I wasn't privileging particular art forms. What I was saying is, and what I think is really important, is that we have particular education systems where the world views, the ways in which we are as human beings, become separated out into a system which pushes kids through a way of learning and knowing which is Western, which is inappropriate for the lives of the people. So those art forms that you're talking about shouldn't just be out in the communities. The communities in the schools should be bringing those in ways where the gap isn't, because that's the gap that kids fall through. The gap between their real lives and then
So how do you do that?
Absolutely. So for for the last 2 years as the Poet Laureate, like I still am the Poet Laureate, just 2017 to 2019. David Eagleton is the new Poet Laureate, just to clarify. So for the last 2 years I've gone around this country and around the Pacific and around, other countries, telling the story of the toko toko, because that's what the Poet Laureateship is to me. The toko toko, the carved Māori walking stick, we're the only country in the world to give our Poets Laureate this piece, and for far too long it's been ignored, right? This piece of artwork, this living, breathing taonga, is a warehouse of story. It's a library, and people are fascinated overseas by, wow, this is amazing. This is a very kind of Polynesian way of knowing, of being in the world, and to be able to use this material object and take it around and say, this is a poem, this is our artwork, this is our culture, this is our living, breathing, library, has been, an honour and a privilege. But, this is 2017. So I think if people take and recognise what is deeply theirs, but it has to start here, right? So that the kids know, we recognise that. That's ours. I go in and I take off the fui or the Samoan fly whisk and I say, who's seen this? And everybody puts their hands up. So suddenly they can relate. We know that object, but we don't know about this thing called the Poet Laureateship. Tell us, So they feel like they belong as well. But we can only do our little bit, with the gifts that we have. I agree.
Barbara, I said it was the last one, so I'm very conscious that we've won. There's an opportunity to talk to our panel afterwards. There's some opportunity, if you've bought books, to sign. There's some books outside to sell. It's extraordinary for the work that it's done. Thank you to our panel for taking the risk. We hadn't planned a great deal. We sat over a cup of tea yesterday afternoon and said, what will we do? And I said, well, we'll ask some questions and we'll open it up to the audience. So thank you for taking the risk, for being curious about what might happen, being playful as well, for sharing the wonder and the beauty and the joy of your work.
Peter, can I just interrupt you?
Yeah, sure.
Because I just really want to mihi to Auckland University for making this possible, and I especially want to mihi to Auckland University as a Victoria University Press author because this doesn't happen enough where these kinds of collaborations happen. And I know this whole Auckland Wellington thing is a bit boring, but I just want to acknowledge that too, David and Naomi and Peter and Auckland University for making this collaboration happen on that level too, because it's not common,
Yeah.
So
Nice.
thank you for everything.
And I will pass it back to you before we're finished. But on behalf of the University of Auckland, if I can thank you first for this evening. Thank our audience for being generous with their questions, challenging with their questions, thoughtful about their questions. These are difficult things for us to work through. We live in anxious times, and what is the place? What is the power and the possibility of the arts? And how do we make them so that they aren't separated from who we are as human beings and the systems that we create and live in? Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. And I'll pass it back to our panel for any final words.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out in the evening to listen to us. No, I hope we've sparked some creativity. Yeah, and you?
No such thing as mistakes, really.
Can't say it any better. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, tēnā koutou katoa, tēnā koutou kua tau mai nei ki te whakanui a mātou, ki te whakahonore i a mātou, me tēnei kaupapa nui, kaupapa o te manawa, kaupapa o te wairua, kaupapa o te hinenga roki. Nō reira, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia ora.